Course Correction, or The Long Walk Home. Episode 4 of the Alistair Finch Mystery Series. Part 1, The Early Tea Time. The first light of morning crept over the fairways of Merton Downs Golf Club like an apology. Pale, hesitant, it flattened the dew into silver and softened the manicured cruelty of the place. The course lay quiet beneath it, too quiet for a man who had not woken up. Arthur Bell lay on his back just off the 7th green, hands folded loosely on his chest as if he had arranged them himself. His blazer was buttoned. His tie straight. The expression on his face suggested mild surprise rather than pain, as though death had interrupted him mid-thought. Gordon Pike, assistant groundskeeper and veteran of 12 winters at Merton Downs, stood a respectful distance away with his cap in his hands. He had seen bodies before, his brother in a factory accident, a drunk once pulled from the river, but something about this one unsettled him. Maybe it was the neatness. Maybe it was the way the grass beneath the man was barely disturbed. Detective Inspector Alistair Finch took it in without comment. He stood with his coat collar turned up against the morning chill, hat pulled low, hands buried in his pockets. Finch had learned long ago that first impressions were most useful when left undisturbed. People rushed to label a scene. He preferred to let it speak. Found him at 5:30, Pike said again, his voice low, as if the course itself might overhear. Same as always. I was checking the greens before the early lot came through. Finch nodded, eyes still on the body. And he wasn't there yesterday evening? No, sir. I'd have noticed. Finch stepped closer. The grass around Bell's shoes was damp with dew, but the leather itself was clean. Too clean. Finch crouched slightly, careful not to disturb anything. How old was he? Finch asked. Mid-50s. Maybe 60. Club member. Played most mornings. Any trouble? Pike hesitated. Not trouble, exactly. He wasn't popular. Finch glanced up. Why? Pike shifted his weight. He liked to talk. About things other men preferred not to. Finch straightened and looked across the course. In the distance, a line of semi-detached houses pressed up against the boundary fence, their identical chimneys breathing in unison. Beyond them, London waited, awake, impatient, already grinding forward. A uniformed constable approached. Sir. Ambulance says heart attack is likely. No visible injuries. Likely, Finch repeated. The constable nodded. Club chairman's here. He'd like a word. The chairman, a stout man with a pink face and a voice trained to command dining rooms, wasted no time. Inspector, I'm sure this is all terribly unfortunate, but would appreciate discretion. Mr. Bell had a history of heart trouble. Collapsed on the course, tragic but not unheard of. Finch met his eyes. You're certain he collapsed here? The chairman smiled thinly. Where else would he have collapsed? Finch gestured to the fairway. Men usually fall where they stand. Not laid out neatly beside the green. The smile stiffened. Are you suggesting? I'm suggesting nothing, Finch said mildly. Not yet. He walked the perimeter slowly, counting steps, watching how the grass bent and rose again. There were no drag marks. No sign of a struggle. But something was missing. Where's his golf bag? Finch asked. The chairman frowned. I beg your pardon. His clubs, Finch said. If he was playing. The chairman glanced toward the clubhouse. Perhaps he'd finished. Finch looked back at the body. Shoes are dry. Grass is wet. He hasn't been walking long. Silence settled between them, broken only by the distant sound of a mower starting up on another fairway. Finch turned to Pike. Anyone else here this morning? Pike swallowed. A boy. Comes round sometimes. Helps with odd jobs. Keeps to himself. Finch's gaze sharpened slightly. Name? Don't know it. Eddie, I think. Finch filed it away. As the ambulance crew finally moved in, Finch stepped back, lighting a cigarette. He watched the smoke drift low over the green, dissipating into the clean morning air. A man had died in a place designed to keep unpleasantness out. Finch had seen enough of such places to know they never succeeded. Not for long. Part 2, Gentlemen's Agreements. Merton Downs Golf Club smelled of furniture polish, overbrewed coffee, and money that had learned how not to speak too loudly. The clubhouse lounge was already half full by the time Finch stepped inside. Jackets hung neatly from chair backs. Newspapers lay folded with care, as though disorder itself were an affront. Conversations dipped momentarily at Finch's entrance, then resumed, quieter, more cautious. Finch removed his hat and nodded to no one in particular. The chairman, Harold Whitcomb, hovered nearby like a host desperate to regain control of a dinner party gone sour. "I've arranged for you to speak with a few members," Whitcomb said. "Men who knew Arthur well." "Well enough," Finch replied. They sat at a long table overlooking the course. Through their windows, the 7th green gleamed innocently in the strengthening light. The first man introduced himself as Peter Hollis, a property solicitor with a tight smile and hands that never stopped moving. Arthur was reliable, Hollis said after a moment's thought. Dependable. Always punctual. Finch waited. He had his opinions, Hollis added. Didn't always keep them to himself. Opinions about what? Finch asked. Hollis sipped his coffee. Business. Marriages. Politics. He had a habit of noticing things. Did that bother you? Finch asked. Hollis smiled thinly. It made mornings longer than necessary. The second man, Gerald Moore, was more blunt. He was a nuisance, Moore said flatly. Never broke a rule, mind you. Just stood close enough to see if you might. Whitcomb cleared his throat sharply. Finch ignored him. Anyone threaten him? Moore snorted. This is a golf club, Inspector. We threaten people by not inviting them to dinner. Finch nodded. That's still a threat. Between interviews, Finch wandered the clubhouse, letting his eyes do what his mouth didn't. He noted the framed tournament photos, men aging into respectability together, their smiles tightening as the years passed. He noted the notice board, scrubbed clean except for polite announcements and a discreet posting about a special assessment due next quarter. Money, Finch thought. Always money. A barmaid, early 20s, sharp-eyed, watched him from behind the counter. You didn't like him, Finch said quietly, when he reached her. She shrugged. Didn't dislike him either. He tipped well. Anyone last night? Finch asked. She hesitated, then leaned in slightly. He came in after closing. Said he'd forgotten something. What time? Late. Past 10. And he wasn't alone. Finch waited. A woman, she said. Didn't look like a member's wife. That, Finch thought, was never accidental. Outside again, Finch walked the course with the club's professional, a former minor champion who spoke in practiced neutrality. Arthur liked the back nine, the pro said. Quieter. Did he walk alone? Finch asked. Usually. And yesterday? The pro frowned. Yesterday, he had company. Who? The pro hesitated. Someone who didn't want to be seen. Finch stopped walking. Everyone here is seen. The pro met his eyes. Not always. They stood together in the open, the wind lifting faintly across the fairway. Finch looked again toward the 7th green, now marked only by darker grass where a man had lain. Arthur Bell had died in a place where secrets were buried under etiquette and trimmed weekly. Finch had no intention of letting this one stay buried. Part 3, The Back Nine. The perimeter of Merton Downs told a different story than the clubhouse ever would. Beyond the clipped hedges and discreet signage, the course bled into a thin strip of scrubland, a service road, and then the backs of houses that pretended not to notice what bordered them. This was where balls were lost, rules softened, and eyes learned when not to look. Finch walked it slowly, hat low, hands in his pockets. That was where he found Cindy Lawless. She was perched on a low fence near the maintenance sheds, boots crossed at the ankles, smoking with the calm entitlement of someone who had never asked permission. You pick interesting parks, she said. Finch didn't break stride. You're trespassing. She smiled. So are you. Cindy had come with information, as she always did, and Finch had learned not to ask how she acquired it. Your dead golfer wasn't just playing for exercise, she said, flicking ash into the grass. He was keeping score. Of what? Finch asked. Debts. Affairs. Bad investments. The kind of thing men like to discuss while pretending they're discussing handicaps. She slid a small notebook from her coat pocket. Belle kept notes. Not names, initials. Dates. Quiet reminders. Finch flipped through it carefully. The handwriting was precise, almost fussy. Blackmail? Finch asked. Leverage, Cindy corrected. He never asked outright. He just let people know he noticed. Finch closed the book. Which makes him dangerous. Which makes him dead, Cindy said. They spoke to the ground staff next. Men who arrived before sunrise and learned early that silence was part of the job. One of them, Len Morris, mid-40s, tired eyes, shifted uncomfortably as Finch questioned him. Belle didn't die on the 7th, Morris said finally. Not at first. Finch's gaze sharpened. Why do you say that? Because I saw him earlier, Morris said. Near the 9th. Arguing with someone. Who? Morris shook his head. Couldn't see. But it wasn't friendly. And later? Later, Morris said quietly, I saw two men with a cart. Moving something heavy. Silence settled again. Finch looked out across the fairway, imagining the scene, controlled, efficient, discreet. No witnesses. Just compliance. That afternoon, the pathologist's preliminary report arrived. Heart failure, yes. But accelerated. Stress-induced. Wilkes asked. Or encouraged, Finch replied. There were trace abrasions on Belle's wrists. Not a struggle. A restraint. Someone had made sure Arthur Belle's final moments happened out of sight, and then arranged the scene to suggest a solitary collapse. Cindy leaned against the wall, arms crossed. That takes confidence. Or practice, Finch said. Who benefits, she asked. Finch thought of the special assessment. The development rumors. The quiet panic beneath the club's civility. People who hate unpredictability, Finch said. And men who believe the course belongs to them. As evening settled in, Finch returned once more to the 7th green. The light was softer now, forgiving. Golfers moved through their rituals, oblivious to the history underfoot. Arthur Belle had walked these fairways believing politeness would protect him. Finch knew better. Politeness only told you how carefully someone intended to hurt you. Part 4, Handicaps. The pathologist's report arrived folded once too many times, as though even paper felt uncomfortable carrying the news. Finch read it slowly in the quiet of his office, hat resting on the corner of the desk like a patient witness. Cause of death, cardiac arrest. Contributing factors, acute stress, elevated blood pressure, pre-existing condition. And then the line Finch had been waiting for. Death likely occurred between 5:10 and 5:25 hours. Finch checked his watch out of habit, then closed the file. Arthur Belle had been moved. Back at Merton Downs, the course hummed with controlled normalcy. Golfers laughed too loudly. The bar reopened early. Whitcomb circulated with the anxious energy of a man determined to outpace rumor. Finch caught him near the locker rooms. The doctors say Belle died earlier than you reported finding him, Finch said casually. Whitcomb stiffened. I only relayed what I was told. Then someone lied to you, Finch said. Or trusted you not to ask. Whitcomb bristled. Inspector, you're insinuating. That someone here understands timing, Finch interrupted. Knows exactly when the course is empty. When the staff looks the other way. Whitcomb straightened his tie. This club runs on routine. Finch nodded. So do crimes that don't want to be noticed. Routine became the shape of the investigation. Finch mapped it carefully. Groundskeepers at 4:45. Early walkers at 6 o'clock. First tee times at 6:30. That left a narrow window, 20 minutes of quiet authority. You don't overpower a man like Belle, Wilkes said, walking beside Finch along the 9th fairway. You hurry him. Yes, Finch said. You convince him it's easier to comply. They stopped near a copse of trees. The grass here was slightly flattened, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. This is where it happened, Finch said. Wilkes looked around. Why here? Privacy without isolation, Finch replied. Close enough to help. Far enough to avoid interruption. Wilkes frowned. Help. Finch gestured toward the maintenance path. Golf carts. Cindy confirmed it that evening, producing a folded betting slip like a magician's flourish. Unofficial wagers, she said. Handled by a man named Gerald Moore. Say Moore you spoke to. Finch recalled the blunt contempt. The disdain for disruption. Moore doesn't like unpredictability, Cindy continued. Bell noticed Moore's debts. Mentioned them out loud. And Moore panicked, Finch said. Or calculated, Cindy replied. He didn't need Bell gone forever. Just quiet. Finch looked up. But silence is temporary. Cindy smiled thinly. So is conscience. They spoke to Moore that night in the clubhouse bar. Moore was composed, glass of whiskey untouched. You're mistaken, Moore said. Bell collapsed. I wasn't even on the course. You were driving a cart, Finch said. Between the 9th and 7th. Moore chuckled. Everyone drives carts. Not before sunrise, Finch said. Not without authorization. Moore's smile faltered, just enough. And you didn't kill him, Finch continued calmly. You just hurried him. Restrained him. Let his heart do the rest. Moore leaned back. You can't prove intent. No, Finch said. But I can prove design. Moore's eyes hardened. This club will protect itself. Finch stood. Clubs don't testify. As Finch left, he glanced once more at the fairway under moonlight. Arthur Bell had taken a long walk, believing routine would keep him safe. It hadn't. And now someone else's routine was about to fail. Part 5, Out of Bounds. The breach came, as Finch suspected it would, over something small. A missing key. Not to a safe or an office, but to a golf cart, number 3, the one kept nearest the 9th fairway. Finch noticed it during a routine walk through the maintenance shed. Hooks lined the wall, each marked with neat stenciled numbers. One hook was empty. Routine had failed. Finch waited. By afternoon, Whitcomb was in his office, face pale, fingers worrying the brim of his hat. Gerald Moore hasn't come in today, Whitcomb said. He hasn't phoned either. Finch nodded. He won't. Why? Whitcomb asked. Because men like Moore don't miss routine unless they're afraid, Finch said. And because he knows the club won't protect him once the lie becomes inconvenient. Moore was found where Finch expected him to be, at the 18th green, standing alone with a club he hadn't swung in 10 minutes. He looked older now. Smaller. You should have left it alone, Moore said without turning. Bell wouldn't have pushed. You didn't stop him, Finch replied. You timed him. Moore finally faced Finch. Do you know what men like Bell do? They wait. They smile. They destroy you slowly. And you hurried him to death, Finch said. Moore's voice cracked. I didn't strike him. You restrained him, Finch said evenly. You frightened him. You let his heart fail. Moore laughed bitterly. And you'll call that murder? Yes, Finch said. Because you planned it. Moore sagged. This place runs on discretion. It runs on lies, Finch said. And today they are out of bounds. Moore didn't resist arrest. At the station, his confession was precise, almost courteous. I thought the course would swallow it, he said. People collapse all the time. Finch closed the statement. Only when no one is helping them stand. As dusk fell, Finch returned one last time to Merton Downs. Golfers lingered in uneasy clusters. Conversations felt brittle. The course had changed, not physically, but irreversibly. Cindy joined him near the gate. Respectability cracks easily, she said. Once you know where to tap. Finch nodded. And people mistake quiet for kindness. She smiled. You don't. Finch looked back at the fairway, now empty. "No," he said. "I mistake it for warning." Part 6, the 19th hole. The thing about golf courses, Finch decided, was that they were never truly empty. Even after the players had gone, after the carts were parked and the flags pulled, the place retained a presence, an echo of measured footsteps and restrained voices, of decisions made quietly while pretending to talk about the weather. Finch returned to Merton Downs 3 days after Gerald Moore was charged. The course was closed now. A polite sign hung at the gate citing maintenance issues. The real reason sat heavier in the air, the illusion had cracked, and the club needed time to remember how to breathe. Whitcomb met him near the clubhouse, shoulders sagging, the stiffness gone from his posture. "I didn't want it to end like this," the chairman said. "No one ever does," Finch replied. Whitcomb hesitated. "There's something you should see." The locker room was silent, stripped of its usual murmurs and rituals. Whitcomb led Finch to a single open locker at the far end. Arthur Bell's. Inside hung a neatly pressed jacket. Below it, polished shoes. Everything arranged with almost obsessive care. Whitcomb reached into the locker's back corner and removed a small envelope. "This was hidden behind the paneling," he said. "We found it during the inventory." Finch opened it. Inside were photocopies, bank transfers, property deeds, medical correspondence. Names Finch recognized. Others he didn't. But the pattern was unmistakable. "These aren't leverage notes," Finch said slowly. "No," Whitcomb replied. "They are payments." Finch looked up. Bell wasn't blackmailing anyone, Whitcomb said quietly. He was settling things. The truth emerged piece by piece. Arthur Bell had been ill longer than anyone knew. A degenerative heart condition. No cure. No dramatic collapse, just a slow narrowing of time. He knew he wouldn't be here much longer, Whitcomb said. And he knew what men like Moore had done to stay afloat. Bell had approached them privately. Offered discretion, not for silence, but for repair. He made them pay back what they owed, Whitcomb continued. To wives. To partners. To investors they'd quietly ruined. Finch absorbed this in silence. He wasn't threatening them, Whitcomb said. He was closing accounts. Finch thought of Bell's tidy handwriting. The dates. The initials. Not blackmail. Reckoning. So why kill him? Finch asked. Whitcomb's voice dropped. Because Moore thought it would never end. He thought Bell enjoyed holding it. Finch nodded. And Moore couldn't tolerate being reminded of what he'd done. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees, stirring flags that no longer marked anything. Finch visited Moore once more. Moore sat smaller now, stripped of polish, his hands folded in his lap. You didn't know, Moore said when Finch told him. I swear to God, I didn't know. You didn't ask, Finch replied. Moore's voice trembled. He looked at me like he owned me. He was dying, Finch said. And trying to leave fewer ruins behind. Moore closed his eyes. I thought he was punishing me. No, Finch said. He was balancing the books. The charge didn't change. It couldn't. Intent still mattered. Design still mattered. But Finch left the prison with the uncomfortable weight of it settling deeper than satisfaction ever did. Justice, he knew, was not the same thing as understanding. That evening, Finch stopped at the clubhouse bar, the 19th hole, as tradition named it. Cindy was already there, feet hooked around the stool, nursing a drink. You look like a man who learned something too late, she said. Something that complicates things, Finch replied. She smiled faintly. It always does. He told her. She listened without interruption. So Bell was cleaning up after men who never intended to change, she said finally. Yes. And one of them killed him because he mistook decency for control, she said. Yes. Cindy took a sip. That's depressingly familiar. Finch looked around the empty bar. Respectability breeds entitlement. And entitlement breeds panic, Cindy added. Later, Finch walked the course alone. The dew had returned, softening the ground, erasing footprints before they could harden into evidence. Finch stopped at the 7th green, standing where Bell had been laid out so carefully. Arthur Bell had walked these fairways knowing exactly who these men were. And he had tried, quietly, to make them better. Finch removed his hat for a moment, then replaced it. Good intentions, he thought, were rarely armor. At home, Finch poured himself a drink he didn't finish. He sat at the small table, staring at the wall where a photograph used to stand. He thought of his wife. Of conversations that had gone polite instead of honest. Of how easy it was to mistake silence for peace. He picked up his notebook and wrote. Some men mistake reckoning for judgment. That's when they panic. He closed it. The next morning, Finch passed Merton Downs on his way into the city. The gates were locked. The signs still polite. But the course was changed now. And Finch knew that somewhere, another place just like it was quietly counting on routine to protect a lie. He adjusted his hat and kept driving.